What if I told you that last word is actually better than it was in the previous sandbox? Turns out it actually is, at least for controller users. Which I know, mouse and keyboard users are already like, oh, the hell with this video, man. But even as someone who's been playing mouse and keyboard for the better part of a year, on Tuesday after the sandbox changes went live, I picked up last word in its supposed nerf form with mouse and keyboard, and I immediately thought what everyone else thought on PC, this weapon is garbage. Then trials came this weekend, and I've been running into some people using last word and using it super effectively, literally missing no shots. And I was like, what the hell? What is happening right now? How are they able to use last word so effectively? And then I saw the light, and that light is the power of aim assist and a controller. And it's quite magical because this weapon, it doesn't miss, fellas. So first up, let's just go over the changes that affected last word. This is update 2.8.0. This is what we're living right now. So first up, the fanfire, which is the intrinsic perk, the exotic perk found on last word, states that it now has its precision scaler adjusted while the weapon is hip firing, meaning there's going to be actual different values in the damage. Now that difference in damage is pretty great. Previously, you were doing 67.95 damage, whether you were aiming down sights or shooting from the hip. It really didn't matter. Now, that damage actually ticked up just slightly from the hip to 68.27, but that damage while aiming down sights greatly drops off to 52.2, meaning it is in your best interest to hip fire with this weapon. Now, the non-precision damage, just the body shot damage in general, actually got a great reduction from hitting 50 per shot to now 38. And that's 38 whether or not you're aiming down sights or shooting from the hip. Then Bungie went even further with it, stating that aiming down sights no longer provided additional effective range, which is the damage fall off of the weapon, which we're going to get into. They also reduced the stability for mouse and keyboard inputs. They even adjusted the way the target acquisition is handled for the weapon in its hip fire form to actually improve the experience. So Bungie is really pushing us to use the last word the way it was intended, which is shooting it from the hip. And then they slashed it in its effective range overall. So they did actual 2 blanket nerfs to it. One while aiming down sights, or was actually 1 blanket nerf to the range. One while aiming down sights though, and then just an effective range nerf just in general. So the last word is meant to be only used up close and as a hip fire machine only, which makes sense because when we look at the exotic perk, that's what last word's trying to be, right? Fanfire actually gives this weapon the ability to deal bonus precision damage when firing from the hip, as well as increasing the reload speed and accuracy of the weapon. Weapon also fires in full auto, although I will recommend anyone that uses last word even while shooting from the hip, just tap fire. I just prefer to tap fire even on controller. On top of that, the weapon also comes with hip fire grip as its trait, which doubles up on the accuracy while shooting from the hip, as well as the stability. So that in combination with fanfire, in combination with the buff that Bungie gave it, has turned last word into the most auto-aim weapon I have ever played with. It is crazy. I'm hitting crits that I know for damn sure I shouldn't be hitting. Let's talk time to kill for this weapon because it does greatly change. Now, previously, before update 2.8.0, like I said, the weapon was hitting 68 damage per crit and 50 per body. It actually had an optimal time to kill value of 0.53 seconds and a body shot time to kill value of 0.8. Very nasty. Extremely nasty in a mouse and keyboard user's hand, as most people just aim down sights. They got the most out of that effective range. Now in update 2.8.0, the time to kill value while aiming down sights is still 0.8 seconds. If you want to aim down sights, you still can, and you'll reach a pretty good TTK value at 0.8, which is quite competitive. But body shot time to kill value greatly drops off. 1.07 seconds at 4 resilience or less, and 1.33 seconds at anything north of 4 resilience. So max resilience included. Not a good time to kill value body shot wise. On top of that, while you're aiming down sights, you're not getting any of the accuracy benefits. None of the stability benefits from hip fire or fan fire, or the buff that Bungie included. Now from the hip, considering that damage is actually increased, which is the way last word is supposed to be, you're looking at an optimal time to kill value of 0.53 seconds. 0.53, which was the previous optimal time to kill value before. Now body shot still remains the same at 1.07 and 1.33, but understand it is much easier. I cannot emphasize how much easier it is landing body shots and crit shots from the hip than aiming down sights. When you aim down sights with this weapon, you might as well just be shooting blanks. You might as well be pissing in the wind. And fellas, I don't know if you've actually pissed in the wind. And for some of you that know what I'm talking about, every time you piss in the wind, what happens? It just blows it right back in your face. That's exactly what happens when you aim down sights with last word. You're just pissing on yourself. So I cannot stress how important it is to not let muscle memory take over, to not aim down sights and instead use the last word like the inner cowboy that you are and fire from the hip. Now, there's actually a reason for this, and it just ties into that effective range. While aiming down sights with Last Word, damage fall off actually begins for this weapon at 18 meters. But while shooting from the hip, the weapon's effective range and damage fall off begins at 19 meters. On top of that, something that was very noticeable about this weapon was even up to the 25 meter range while shooting from the hip, the weapon still felt phenomenal in terms of bullet magnetism, stickiness, and just outright hit registration. Now, I went back and forth with a number of Rumble games. I tried the weapon, mouse, and keyboard for a little bit, and then I would jump on controller. Now, I was hip firing a bunch with Last Word on both inputs. Mouse and keyboard, though, I flat out saw shots, making contact, but not registering. Not registering even from the hip with mouse and keyboard. But the moment I plugged in my controller, I found myself able to square up with my enemies, almost like the way we used to do back inside of Destiny 1. That reticle would somehow magically find its way to my opponent's face and just would go to Pound Town. I cannot stress how crazy insane the bullet magnetism is on Last Word when shooting from the hip on a controller input. Now, I've seen a lot of complaints here lately. A lot of people asking for Hardlight to be nerfed. Not saying auto rifles aren't good. And when it comes to full auto weapons, controller definitely gets the biggest benefit as that aim assist really kicks in. And so I can imagine that console users are probably experiencing the auto rifle meta at its fullest potential. But at the same time, I am so surprised I don't see more people that play with controllers using Last Word because it is that dominant. And even though its body shot time to kill isn't necessarily competitive, the amount of flinch that I'm putting into my enemies with these consecutive hip fire shots just throws them off completely. So sure, yeah, you're looking at a 1.07 second time to kill all the way up to 1.33. Obviously not a competitive time to kill value, but it doesn't matter because if your opponent can't land any shots on you because you are peppering him with the power of Doc Holliday, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if his spare rations can 3-tap you because he won't be able to land those spare ration shots. Now, I will say this. The one saving grace that's keeping Last Word balanced throughout all of this is the parameters set around the weapon. To truly use as a weapon effectively and to win out on those ones, you do have to kind of bring those gunfights down to 20 meters, which does open things up. It opens things up to shotguns, crazy melees. Thundercore, by the way, has made a return this season. So you start to get to that close quarter combat area that is somewhat scary to be in, even with something like Last Word. The biggest benefit, though, is that Last Word is living in a sandbox where shotguns have had their effective range nerf, meaning it's not that much of a scare. It's not that big of a scare. If it was in the previous sandbox where shotguns could still map you, I would be a little more hesitant on saying that Last Word is the most dominant weapon in close quarter scenarios. But now, even for my controller users, even if you're on PC, which is what's so crazy here, even against very good mouse and keyboard users, Last Word is cracked. It absolutely slaps, man. So much so that even I'm finding myself putting my mouse and keyboard down for just a moment because I haven't had this much fun with Last Word in quite some time. Fellas, this was the way that Last Word should have been shipped when it came back to us last year. Matter of fact, when we talked about Last Word last year, when we reviewed it, we were still on console, and I was very upset with the state of Last Word. Now it has done the opposite. It has become super powerful in the hands of controller users and pretty crap for my mouse and keyboard users. Now, granted, I hope there's still gonna be an adjustment to the weapon because it really feels like night and day. I don't think the weapon should be as bad as it is in the hands of a mouse and keyboard user. I'm not saying that you can't use it. I did play multiple games with mouse and keyboard, and I was still able to use the weapon effectively, but nowhere near on the same level as I could with the controller. Now, granted, play styles really change between both inputs, right? I would say, at least for myself, mouse and keyboard, I get a little crazy because I kind of feel a little overconfident in situations. I feel like I can flick to that shot when I have no business being in that situation. Controller, every time I ever put one in my hands, it's like instinct takes over. All the previous years of experience playing Halo and all these other games just takes over and actually begin to strategize versus just laying on the W key and running into situations like an 8. So it could be a little bit of that, but only slightly, guys. Slightly. So many weapons I've picked up on mouse and keyboard that I can go, hey, hands down, Waking Vigil feels better for mouse and keyboard users. Spare Rations feels better for mouse and keyboard users. This is a first for me that I've been able to pick up, and I can hands down say this weapon has been designed, rebalanced, and shipped back out to us for controller users. Now, the last thing I want to bring up about Last Word, which seems to be a little more emphasized in this sandbox than in the previous ones, is nuts on the ground, fellas. Nuts on the ground is so important. All the benefits of the accuracy, from hip fire to fan fire to the buff that Bungie gave it, you get all those benefits, but it seems seems to only take place when your nuts are on the ground, unless you're using it with an exotic that allows you to boost that accuracy from the air, maybe like Top Tree Dawnblade, Hunter with Lucky Pants, even something like Lion Rampants on Titans for that increase in hipfire accuracy. I would say those exotics and those subclasses pair pretty nicely to allow for the weapon to be accurate while in the air with this gun. But outside of that, this weapon, even for controller users, gets extremely inaccurate when going in the air, which is why I cannot emphasize how important it is that you keep your nuts on the ground while hip firing. I know it's easy to jump up, and if you got to get a cleanup on someone, obviously you could jump up and just get a cleanup on them. That's okay. But any 1v1 scenario, I would just recommend that you just be stationary on the ground, whether crouch or even standing, but you stay on the ground. You'll notice that reticle will flare out too when you jump in the air, which indicates how inaccurate the gun actually gets. Plus, it seems to completely diminish all the accuracy buffs that this weapon brings to the table when going in the air. So those are my recommendations for using Last Word effectively in update 2.8.0, guys. Nuts on the ground, always shoot from the hip, and try to keep every engagement 20 meters or less. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.